Hi friends and welcome. Today I'm going to show you my process for painting this beautiful little boy from Uganda. I start off by using masking fluid, which is like a liquid latex fluid, and I just dab it on in the areas that I want to stay white. I don't always use masking fluid, but if I know I'm going to be using lots of washes where I may not be able to protect the small white areas, I'll use it. I decided to pre-mix a few colors of black just so it's easier. I'm wetting the entire paper so that I can have some soft layers as I apply the paint. I should mention here too that I've taped down all four sides of the paper to reduce the buckling. This is 140-pound cold press paper, so it's not the thickest of papers, so if you apply a lot of layers, it will buckle unless you stretch the paper or tape it down. And even taping it down, you are going to get a little bit of buckling, but it's not too bad, and you can always flatten it out later. So the paper is still damp here, as you can see, so the edges where I'm painting are still nice and soft. Down at the bottom though, the paper had started to dry out, so I did re-wet it a little bit with the thicker brush. I just don't want any hard edges. And as you can see, I'm just using a blow dryer on the lowest setting to dry the paper. Some people claim that it changes the color of their paint. I haven't found that, but I am careful not to use it on too high of a heat. So here I'm just applying more very thin washes of color. And again, if I want the soft edges, then I'll wet the paper first. Now I want his face to be very soft layers. No, I don't want any hard lines on his face, so I've wet the whole face before applying the paint. And again, I could probably go heavier with the washes on his face, but I'm always very careful because I'm afraid I'm going to go too dark and then I can't reverse it. So I start with very light washes of color. Here I'm just gently removing the masking fluid by rubbing it with my finger, and it comes off really easily. The trick is though not to leave it on for too long. I've left it on for a couple of days and it doesn't damage the paper, but I have heard stories where it has peeled the paper if you're using a large amount of the masking fluid, so just be careful. Or test it on your paper beforehand on another piece. So I've switched to smaller brush for this part. It gives me more control over the paint flow out of the paintbrush. And for the details on the face, eyes, nose, mouth, ears, anything like that, I want more control, so I use a smaller brush. On the shoulder, I'm painting wet on dry, which just means wet paint on dry paper. Because I noticed on the reference photo there was a sharper shadow on the shoulder there. And I'm still able to soften the shadow so it's not a hard line with a damp brush. So I've just cleaned out the paint and dampened the brush. And you'll see I do that here again. I like the smaller brush because I do have more control over things like that. I just don't want a huge amount of paint coming out of a big brush and then I've got no control over it. I have done that before. So again, just looking at my reference photo and slowly building up layers of shadow. My technique of a watercolor portrait in this case is a really realistic portrait. So the technique I use is laying down very thin washes of paint so that I have more control over the color and any hard lines, so I can keep everything soft. I probably could go darker faster, but I like the look of the very thin washes in a realistic portrait, especially on the face. I loosen up on the clothing and in the background, but on the face area where your focal point is, I like it to be a more soft and controlled look. So after letting those layers dry, I wet the paper again, so I could again start with very soft washes of paint on the face. Softening up edges with the damp brush. Again, I've wet this area before laying down my washes so that they're nice and soft with no hard lines. I should mention that in between washes, I make sure that I let the area dry completely before wetting the paper or laying down another wash. You don't want to lay more paint into an area that you've just painted, and if it's still damp, it can create blooms and other effects on your watercolor that you don't want. So here again, I've switched to a smaller brush so I can control the paint a lot easier and get into those tiny little areas. So again, here I've let the paper completely dry before re-wetting it so that I can get those nice soft washes again on the face. And this paper is Arches 140 pound cold press paper, and it takes lots and lots of water and washes of paint. So if you're gonna do this technique, it's really better to spend the extra money on the good paper. It's 100% cotton, and it takes lots and lots of washes really well without disintegrating or anything. So to me, it's worth the extra cost, especially when I'm working on commissions. So for the bigger areas of the face, again, I'm using a bigger brush, though it's just easier for the washes to go on nice and smooth. And the paper is damp still from before. If at any time you get too much paint down and you want to lift some up, you can always take a Kleenex and dab it, and that you'll see I do that there we go. There was a little bit too much paint, or I got too close to the edge, but I was able to just dab it where I wanted, and it just absorbed the paint. So here again, I'm just adding a little more detail, a little more shadow, using a smaller brush so that I have more control. Just slowly building up layers, layer after layer, and until I reach the result that I want. I apologize for the film footage on this video. I used an old phone when I did it. It's a bit older, and it's jiggly and the color's off, but I've since gotten a new phone and a different camera, so hopefully it'll be a lot better in the newer videos. So what I'm doing here is I'm dropping just plain clear water on top of a wet wash, and it's going to create blooms, as you can see here, and it pushes the paint outward. So that's just to create some texture on that area of the painting. And on the left, I'm using coarse salt. And I'll let that completely dry before I disturb the salt, and then I'll just wipe it off afterwards. That salt will create a really neat texture that will help with that wall area that I'm painting after it dries. I apologize I missed the footage of wiping off the salt, but I just waited till it completely dried and then I just brushed it off. And again, anytime I want a bit of a harder line, I'll just apply the paint onto dry paper, or even if it's just a little bit damp. And that way the edges will be still a little bit soft. You'll just have to experiment on another piece of paper and see how the paint reacts on wet and damp and dry paper. And again, the softer washes are done on damp paper or wet paper. So now I'm starting to build up the darker areas of the painting, in the shadows, little crevices. Just constantly checking my reference photo to see the different values. And that just means the dark and the light areas. And you can see on the face there, I got that wee bit of a line on the cheek, but I'm able to smooth that out later on. So just again, applying detail in soft layers and washes. So again, before applying this layer, I've let the paper completely dry so that it doesn't create any blooms in the paint or unwanted textures. So just letting each layer dry before I apply another wet wash. So now I'm laying in just the final touches of this painting, getting the darkest darks in and anything that I can see, just the little final touch-ups. Again, I apologize for the film footage on this, and I know it's pretty hard to watch. But going forward, the film footage should be a lot better, at least, than this. And I hope you got something out of this video. This is how I work, and I'm just happy to share my process with you. Thanks for watching.